Think summer's a slow season for birding? Not in the backwoods of Maine.
We pulled into this campsite and heard the sound up in the trees, and then Dustin stopped everyone and was like, listen. And what we found in those trees at our campground was totally unexpected.
And let's just say we weren't the only ones staying at Kidney Pond that week. Our neighbors, they had antlers.
It's time for a wild report on our adventures from the deep backwoods of Maine. So let's get to it on the Hike Hearth Birding Podcast. So Dustin, for our question of the week this week, was I misunderstood in thinking that summer is a bad time for birding? Because I really thought it was all about migration either in the spring or the fall.
You weren't wrong. Spring definitely gives you the most opportunity to see the most birds passing through kind of in a single area. But in the summertime, remember, they were migrating to go to a place to breed. Breeding season is really the sweet spot, right? Adults are feeding their fledglings, nest territories are still active, and birds are vocal at that time of year. So they're harder to see in the trees and the leaf cover and all that kind of stuff, but they're more vocal, especially early in the morning and in forest edge habitats. And that was a bonus for us because our campground had a nice big open field with great edge habitat all the way around. Baxter State Park is full of spruce fir zones that host the boreal breeders that aren't seen in a lot of places elsewhere in Maine. So it's not just about bird numbers. Birding is also about watching those parenting behaviors, hearing food calls, and spotting those juveniles.
Okay, so out of everything that we saw while we were out in the backwoods of Maine in Baxter, what were the top 5 birds that really stood out to you?
Well, the first one is the iconic common loon. By midsummer in Maine, most of their nesting is done and adults are either busy feeding chicks or recovering from those efforts. This grouping behavior that we saw is pretty typical after breeding season or for birds that aren't old enough to breed just yet, and I think that's what we saw here. Their calls are one of the most iconic sounds in the North Woods. What we heard, yodels, tremolos, and wails, are used to claim territory, reunite with mates, or signal alarm like we see here. This is also a great illustration of how they're not very good at flying, so they swim as fast as they can, whether it's above the water or below, to escape a perceived threat. In this case, I was there. There was no threat on the water, but they weren't having it.
They might have seen something underwater that you didn't see.
Maybe. But Maine is one of the last strongholds for loons in the eastern United States. The state has an estimated 4,000 adult loons, and areas like Baxter State Park are really needed to keep that number stable.
Okay, so that was the common loon. What's next?
My second one is the black and white warbler, which we see coming through Massachusetts during migration time, but we were in the heart of their nesting territory, so I saw them multiple times a day, hearing them nonstop with their really high-pitched call. But they nest in deciduous and mixed forest during breeding season throughout the Northeast. They're unique among warblers because they kind of creep up and down the bark of a tree. They might go head first down the bark of a tree like a nuthatch, and it's pretty much the only warbler that does that. And they nest low to the ground. Males sing in a high-pitched wee-see, wee-see sort of song to defend that territory, and one of the earliest arriving warblers in spring, and it continues vocalizing well into the summer.
So that's 2. What's your third bird on your list?
My third is a really secretive bird that's usually really difficult to get good pictures of, and it was an American bittern.
Okay.
And I have some photos we can show where I encountered an American bittern in the marshy area on the edge of the lake while I was kayaking in the morning, and it conveniently went right up into the bare branches to give me some good shots, which is unheard of for American bitterns. But they're a really interesting bird. They breed across southern Canada and the north-central U.S. They're a little smaller than a great blue heron and a little more brown and streaky, but they have that similar body shape as a great blue heron. They're found in freshwater wetlands and marshes, and they like to hide in the tall, emergent reeds and vegetation like cattails and bulrushes. They sit there in the grass and they sway with their head up back and forth. to blend in with the breeze or the movement of the flora in the breeze. And their peak breeding vocalizations are from mid-June into late July. It's a very non-sexy sound. They make just kind of like a deep glug sound.
Well, you don't think it's sexy, but the other bitterns apparently do, or they would have gone extinct.
I guess.
From lack of breeding, right? Eyes of the beholder, right? All right. So that's common loon, black and white warbler, American bittern. That's 3. What's number 4 going to be?
Yeah, the shoreline of this lake was chock full of common yellowthroat, which is such a fun, beautiful bird and a good bird for beginning birders because it's easy to learn the call. It's easy to identify. The only trick is the male and the females look a lot different. But the male has a beautiful bright yellow plumage with a black mask on his face, like a Zorro mask. But these are low foraging birds, highly responsible to pitching or any movement around.
Wait, time out. What do you mean pitching?
Pitching.
Oh.
It's like when birds alarm, they make a little psh, 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 psh sound. So sometimes a little bit of noise like that can help get them interested and come up out of the shrubbery to get a look at what's going on.
Got it. So that's not something you just made up in the forest. That's a real thing.
No, and pitching can elicit a lot of deep feelings about using that as a technique. It should be used sparingly.
I personally feel it's catfishing, but that's just my opinion. That's my opinion.
Maybe cat birding. I don't know.
Yeah, you're lying. You're creating You're creating an illusion to attract a bird.
But it cuts both ways too, because if you pish a little and get the bird to come up, they're more likely than not to see you as the threat and then move away. So you might get yourself a better glimpse in the moment, but in the long term, you might be driving them away too.
Okay. Now that I've completely derailed our topic of conversation. So that's number 4, the common yellowthroat.
Yep. And then lastly, I kept coming across a blue-winged teal hen and her babies, but they always were like just around the bend of the river up in front of me. And as soon as they would see me, they would dart into the weeds. So I didn't get any good pictures of them, but they're just a striking waterfowl that breeds from southern Alaska all the way across Canada into the northern U.S. They've got... They're really mainly seen as migrants in New England than confirmed breeders in our area, but definitely up in northern Maine where we were. And their diet includes, like most ducks, aquatic invertebrates and plant materials, surely an occasional fish if they can get their beak on one of them in shallow water, but that's not the primary part of their diet. And they're among the earliest waterfowl to migrate south at the end of the breeding season, often by late summer.
Okay. And I'm sure I can dig up some pictures of the blue-winged teal, even though you didn't manage to get any on our trip. And if our viewers are wondering where some of our photography comes from, and you haven't checked out our description of our videos, we always explain that if Dustin didn't get a clear shot, because it's not always easy to photograph birds, we go to very specific resources for photography. That would be U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, the national parks, or a variety of organizations like that. Thank you to all the rangers out there who post public domain content. They've got a huge library of resources on that site, and we always give them credit in our description. But I digress. Before we move on and close out this question of the week, which really was to educate me on the fact that birding in the summer is a great opportunity, any final thoughts about birding in the height of summer, Dustin, or even what made this trip special from that standpoint?
Yeah, birding in the summer can definitely be less predictable because you never know what you're going to find, but that to me is some of the fun of it. Baxter State Park in Maine is a really special place. There's over 200,000 acres of protected and undeveloped land. It is pristine, is the only word I can think of to describe it. But it's been designed that way, specifically to remain wild by its founder and donor, former governor of Maine, Percival Baxter. And it's one of the most pristine birding environments in the whole Northeast. It has a unique habitat mix. There's a lot of different elevation shifts. Oh, that reminds me. The Swainson's thrush should have been one of our top 5. So honorable mention to the Swainson's thrush, which we had great experiences with, and I learned that call in a new way also. But that elevation shift is what makes the habitat great for the Swainson's thrush and other birds that specialize at different specific elevations. It has, as we mentioned, spruce, fir forest, alpine zones, glacial ponds, and lots of wetlands and bogs. But I'd also love to hear from our audience their answer to this question. So if you're watching and you've been out birding this summer during breeding season, what birds have you been seeing? Drop your special highlights in the comments below.
Okay, audience, I want you to picture this. Our family had just arrived at our campsite in Baxter State Park up in north central Maine. Okay, one of the wildest places in the Northeast. There's no paved roads, no electricity, no running water, no cell signals, no Wi-Fi. So none of that. Just miles and miles of deep forest. And one thing we'll also mention, if you're a hiker in the Northeast, this is a very special location for you if you know what the Appalachian Trail is, because this is where it ends. Appalachian Trail starts in Georgia and goes all the way up to Baxter State Park, and it ends on Mount Katahdin. So there we are in this amazing place, unloading our gear, and Dustin stops everybody in the process. We've got the whole truck filled with stuff. And he's like, listen, now I personally go through this very frequently in my life, married to a birder, but this was one of the moments where he really didn't deserve me and my teenage daughter rolling our eyes with all of our gear because, yeah, Dustin, anyways, do you want to tell them? I'm just so excited. Like, I'm doing a terrible opening, but do you just want to tell them what you spotted?
I found a family of merlins around their nest.
A family of merlins. And if you're like me, he's not talking about King Arthur. He's not talking about some wizard. He's talking about a bird. So we'll get to that. But let's start off with what tipped you off so quickly that it was merlins? Because I thought, I heard them. I thought it was blue jays.
Yeah. I didn't immediately know it was merlins. In fact, my gut reaction was, oh, those are American kestrels, because it sounds a little similar to that. I don't get to hear kestrels that often, but I knew something wasn't quite right. And during breeding season, and even if you use your Merlin app, babies don't sound the same as adults. So even if it's a bird you're familiar with, you don't necessarily recognize the sound of babies.
Time out. Is the Merlin app named after this bird?
Light dawns on Marblehead.
Oh my goodness. It's a special bird. Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah. So the Merlin app is
named after
cheekily
this
named
bird.
after this bird.
Oh,
yes.
okay. All right. So you thought it was a kestrel.
I did, because oftentimes, this is a quirk, I think, of me. Maybe other birders have it happen to them too. Sometimes the thing that draws my attention isn't the call I recognize, but it's the call I know that I don't recognize. And so the call of in this case, baby merlins jumped out at me. And when I started looking around for kestrels, I saw a merlin streaming in. Merlins are like blue jay-sized falcons, and they don't go anywhere slowly. These birds were streaking in about every 15 minutes like a tiny little fighter jet with their wings back and elbows pointed. Seriously, like an F-15 Tomcat or something. But the parents would come in and kind of dive into the pines, and then there'd be like some motion, but you couldn't see anything. And of course, we're unpacking. I didn't even have my binoculars and my optics out yet. But I knew there was something there. And I've said on the podcast before that you have to trust your instincts to kind of be able to triangulate where a sound is coming from. And in this case, on almost my first guess, I zoned right into where the nest was. I didn't see it right away, and it took me like 2 days until I confirmed it was in that spot. But I zeroed in on where I thought the sound was coming from, and it was coming from more than one location. So I knew it was babies that were perhaps spread out from their nest and maybe had already left the nest.
Before we go any further, and boy, do we have stuff to show you guys. Can you give everyone who might be listening like me a primer on Merlin the bird?
Sure. Merlins are one of our smallest falcons. So they're maybe just a tick bigger than an American kestrel, but they're basically the size of a blue jay, about 10 to 14 inches. They're small, fierce falcons. They're found across North America, Europe, and Asia, but not in high numbers. So they're uncommon across most of their range. We've had Merlins here on our lake a couple of times, but I've only seen them twice in maybe 15 years here. So they're not that common, and they tend to breed further north. So this was really on the southern edge of their breeding habitat. So I felt really lucky to find them there. They've got these like sharp pointed wings and a banded tail and a very like rusty spotted kind of pattern on their breast, like a lot of hawks do, even though it's a falcon. And they've got these rapid piston-like wing beats, far faster than kestrels or larger falcons, which is why once I saw it, I realized, oh, it needs to be another bird, another falcon like a kestrel, but about the same size. And that really just meant Merlin. There's no other candidate for that. No other suspect. Males are kind of bluish gray with heavy streaking and a barred tail and a white tip. Females, a little bit browner with off-white and just darker overall. They lack the bold facial stripes seen on kestrels, but they do have smaller, less defined facial markings called malar stripes, which are below the eyes.
Okay. All right. Let's get to the good stuff. Because you captured some video footage and photography of the fledglings, right? So let me pull that up. All right. So look at them.
Oh, they're so cute. I can't even stand it. So these fledglings were branching, and that's a behavior where they've left the nest, but they can't quite fly yet. They might be able to fly a little bit just to get up a branch or two, but really they kind of like tumble down a branch, climb up the trunk, climb out the next branch, and just sort of like spread out to keep away from predators. And you might even be able to hear the green flies that were in the background. And when you get fed freshly dead songbirds, there's definitely some stuff up in the trees that would attract flies. So moving around helps them move away from those annoyances, just like people would try to get away from them.
I noticed this guy isn't in one of the spruce trees.
No, so he had actually tumbled down out of one of the spruce trees into this other tree for a while and then gradually climbed back up. But every day when I went back, he kind of had returned to the same general area where I had found him initially. So they use these controlled hops, flaps, and really test branches to strengthen their muscles, improve their coordination, and work on their gripping of, branches, right? They have really strong talons for feet, and we're going to see them in some of the clips here. But the talons are so big and so strong, they're almost oversized for their body, which makes it probably a little bit challenging to grip onto a branch, more so than a songbird might. But they go through this branching behavior for up to 10 days, depending on the species and how long they stayed in the nest. One of these babies was staying right by the nest against the trunk of a tree.
Look at his feet.
Yeah, look at those. They're little, like, toe knives. So these fully perched fledglings, they're hopping around awkwardly, calling loudly, because they spread out so much. They also have to announce to their parents where they are so that they can be found to be fed. So the parents, when they were screaming in from overhead, they would also be calling loudly, like, "Wah, wah, wah," as they flew often from one end of the lake right over our cabin to this forest edge to feed the babies. And so I would hear the parents coming, but I would grab my camera and run over. The parents would sort of like drop off the fast food, the dead songbird that they had caught. By the way, they typically catch their prey mid-flight. So they're not trying to surprise their prey and catch them from behind or above, they'll just chase them and they'll catch them because they are fast.
Yeah, I couldn't believe how fast the parents were. Like you would just, it was like a streak in the sky and they were gone.
Yeah. So they're much louder than adult Merlins. They're using that voice to attract their parents. And this moment is pretty rare because as a birder, I only see Merlins a couple times every few years, but to see them regularly and this intimately with the babies right around the nest, it was really special for me.
I think it was special for everyone. I loved how everybody in the campground would get excited, especially when the parents would show up. There'd be all kinds of commotion in the trees. So, for people who weren't like you and out there frequently really kind of keeping track of where they were, those moments made it easier for average people like me to spot them. But, one of the things that you talked about with us when we were there was just some of the other reasons why this bird in particular, it was really special for us to get to witness a Merlin family and raising their young, and why for this bird, that's really kind of an accomplishment. So do you want to kind of reiterate for our audience some of the things that you were talking about with like our daughter and with us about these birds?
Yeah, a Merlin is not typically a bird you can like plan to go see at a known location. They move around a lot. They're fast hunters. Yes, you might see them now and then, but really hard to plan for. Mm-hmm. But so it was special to be able to find one, but especially to be able to see one in its breeding habitat at that young age, see the calling behavior. All of it just added up to a great birding experience.
Okay.
And unexpected. This one was also, when I found it, I went and spoke with the park ranger to say, hey, did you know there were Merlins nesting in that tree? And she had no idea.
Oh, really?
She said, oh, yeah, they've been calling for a couple of days, but I didn't know what they were. And before I had even located the nest, I sort of showed her exactly where I thought the nest was, and it was that spot. So when you can, find something and, on your own without going to a known location, to me, that's the best kind of birding. It's the most rewarding kind. And then to be able to share that with people so others can experience it is really great. And then lastly, Merlins were once in serious decline, especially during the 20th century. Just like a lot of other raptors, they were impacted severely by the use of DDT and other pesticides that caused their eggshells to thin and really reduce their breeding success. So thanks to environmental protections and the ban of DDT, they've rebounded significantly in both the US and Canada. So they are considered a conservation success story, especially in the northern forest of the US and the boreal zones of Canada. And they're just not easy to observe. Their flight is incredibly fast. They blend in really well. You can see their camouflage is superior. So they're really tough to see. And I can probably put up some photos from last summer when we had them nearby as well.
Okay. So, you talked a little bit about why it's kind of special to be able to bird these birds because they're not necessarily easy to find. But was there anything about this experience that kind of stood out to you on a personal level, even after all these years of birding and seeing all kinds of surprises, or any personal kind of reflections or anything that you have?
Yeah, for me, it was witnessing behavior that's deeper than you come across in almost all of the field guides. The field guides that all of the great field guides give you like the basic information about a bird, but you'd really have to go deep into the literature to find like nesting behavior and stuff for a bird like Merlin. And birders, we like reading about lots of species. We don't usually dive into a singular species like that. So to be able to see those behaviors up close, hear them, see what was going on, and connect the dots about behaviors we've read about from many species, but to see it in this specific species, that was really great. Lastly, to our listeners, have you ever come across fledglings in the wild? We'd love to hear your experience in the comments.
So this final segment of this week's podcast episode is definitely going to be a bit of a departure from our normal birding content. But after having this experience on our summer vacation, how could we not share it with you? So I want to start out by giving you a little bit of backstory. We love Maine and tend to vacation there an awful lot every year. And every time we're up in Maine, oh yeah, like Cadia, we are hopeful that we're going to see moose. We don't tend to see them down here in Massachusetts, but they are definitely up there in Maine, and they're one of my favorite animals. So it's always very special for me personally when I get to see them. But we haven't seen any moose in our summer adventures.
We've struck out the last several trips, even when we were, specifically looking for moose.
Yeah. I mean, I can think back to when our daughter was 3 years old, and we were up in Metawisla Lodge and spent days looking for them to photograph them and saw nothing. And she's a teenager now. So it's been a while, right? So anyways, why am I telling the audience this stuff? Dustin, why don't you chime in now? Why is Lynn babbling again during this episode? And this time, not even about birds.
She's Twitter-pated about a mammal.
I totally am.
Yeah, I hoped we'd spot one for you, but I never dreamed that we'd have this many great experiences and just be able to camp with them, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So first off, our campground details. We stayed at Kidney Pond Campground, which is one of the 2 campgrounds in Baxter State Park that has cabins. But don't be fooled. This is a deeply rustic location with only the bare bones of any amenities. So no electricity, no running water, no cell service, no trash cans or showers. This year, for the first time, I found out my iPhone did have a little bit of satellite coverage for text messaging only. That was the extent of our connectedness, so it was great. But just the essentials. We had a private log cabin, a propane lantern, an outhouse, wood stove, and lakefront access right on the banks of Kidney Pond. This was a great starter point for a lot of small trailheads. If you're into hiking, this was near the trailheads for Sentinel Mountain, Double Top Mountain, Lily Pad Pond, Big and Little Rocky Ponds, and a pond called Beaver Pond that's, I think, actually just over the border of the park.
Yeah, this is an extraordinary, beautiful location, as are so many places in Baxter State Park. And when we were there, as you've alluded, we got to camp with a very special neighbor, which our audience can probably figure out who that is. But
well, my first sign of this was when I was looking for the Merlin babies. I looked down at one point and saw a giant pile of scat that I knew could only be from a moose. So I was a little surprised that the moose was hanging out so close to the campground, but not being terribly experienced with moose poop. I didn't know if it was 1 day old or 10 days old. I had no idea. But it turns out that this moose was basically bedding down in that spot 100 yards or so from our outhouse, of all places, every night, essentially. So I first noticed her the first morning at camp. I went out paddling, and as I was on my way in, I spotted her to my right and was able to get some really good initial photography of the first moose that we saw. She was a yearling cow, meaning born last year in 2024, just having had probably her first birthday. So maybe she's, 14 months old or something like that.
And how did you know that? You didn't just guess at her age, right?
I didn't. The rangers kind of clued us in, but you could tell that she was young, a little bit scrawny, skinny enough to see her ribs. She was kind of still had the all legs kind of feature walk that young deer have, that kind of thing. So you could tell it was a youngin', as
she
they
was
say.
A supermodel as far as mooses go. I thought she was gorgeous, and those long legs, she was adorable.
And she was totally nonplussed about our presence. I was able to just sit in the kayak 40, 50 yards from her, shooting photography to my heart's content, and she was eating away, having no problem with my presence. And she showed up like clockwork every morning and early evening after that. feeding on those aquatic plants, especially the water lilies and pondweed, which are staple in a moose's summer diet. And other than like the dripping water and the crunching sound you could hear her make when she was chewing, she hardly made a sound, just slowly and quietly browsed along the shoreline. So we were just lucky humans that got to share that space in nature with her. We all wanted her to feel safe, so we could enjoy observing her from the porches of our cabins, and she was content with that.
Yeah, she was great. But that wasn't all, right? It was but wait, there's more kind of vacation time at Kidney Pond.
Yeah, so we heard from the rangers that there were at least 5 different moose that had been around the lake in the prior week. There was the young yearling cow that we were talking about, a second older female by herself, a bull moose, which I happened to see on the second day, and then a third female, but this one with a calf. So the third female and the calf are the 2 that we did not ever see. So there's always going to be something extra to go back and look for next time, and that will keep me going back. But the second morning, when I spotted a young bull moose, I had spent the time primarily birding and exploring upriver from the lake, knowing that when I came back the way I had to pass through this large, wetland outlet area, kind of a bay. And I knew, because I went out early at sunrise, I knew the chances were better at seeing a moose a little bit later once morning had fully broken. So as I came back upriver and back into the lake, into that cove, that bull moose was just standing there right in the middle of the cove, munching away. And he didn't mind my presence so much, but he was a little annoyed by it. So you could tell that he didn't love that I was there, and I just backed off and tried to get the sun at my back so I could take photos of him as best I could. So he stayed a little bit further away to the far side of the lake and was a bit more cautious, but he waded right into the pond to feed on all those delicious plants, and he didn't seem to mind me floating by too much. And I did get to see him kind of like walking across the cove and eventually climbing his way out onto the shoreline and making his way back into the shade.
That's awesome. So in honor of our amazing experience that we had camping with these incredible animals, I thought we could go over a few fun facts about moose. So I'm going to start.
Okay.
So I thought it was amazing to find out that moose are actually excellent swimmers. I did not know that. Like, they're really good at it. Even calves, their babies can swim. And moose can swim like several miles at a time. And they can dive over 15 feet down to reach aquatic plants.
They're built for the water. This is their thing.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool.
Yeah. Moose are the second largest land mammal in North America. Do you know what the first is?
I don't have the slightest idea.
It's a bison.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So moose are the second largest land mammals. They eat up to 50 pounds of plants per day.
Amazing.
And despite their size, they're surprisingly quiet and solitary, especially in the summer, which makes experiences like the ones we had extremely special.
Yeah, and then Dustin mentioned that the female that was hanging around the campground and that we were all seeing every day was a yearling. So yearlings are usually newly independent and exploring their own territory after being pushed out by their moms.
Yeah, the mom might have a new calf coming.
We're not doing that with our teenager. She can stay with me as long as she wants.
Yeah, so moose often will inhabit a territory at a density of about 3 to 5 moose per square mile. And that fits about what we were seeing for these 5 moose.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And bull moose, like the one I observed from the kayak, they start growing their antlers in spring. And by July, these photos were taken around July 14th. As you can see, they're still in the velvet stage. Velvet is like this blood-rich, furry skin covering on top of their antlers. And it really nourishes the antlers for growth. And they can grow up to 2 to 3 inches per day when they are at their peak growth rate, which is probably what was happening around that time.
Yeah, I still can't believe how lucky we got I mean, she literally was right outside our porch in the water feeding one morning. It
Well,
was
that
it
was the craziest
amazing.
moment because I saw the bull moose and was excited to come tell you guys about it, and hopefully that we'd all get to see that one later in the day. And as I went up to the cabin, our cabin had like a deck that faced the lake and went all the way from one end of the cabin to the other, straight across the whole backside. And as I was standing at the steps on one end of the deck, telling you about the bull moose, you said to me, "Oh, but what about the young female? Did you see her?" And as I looked up, she was passing behind the cabin and was right
there
at the other end of the deck. And I said, "Oh, actually, she's right there."
And I turned and literally didn't even have to look over my shoulder. She was like coming out. It was great. It was great. No, it was amazing. But you know, the first time I ever saw a moose was years ago on a hiking trail in Baxter State Park. And it was our first summer that we were seriously dating, and we had gone on this camping trip together. Remember that?
I do. It was on the Chimney Pond Trail. We did hike into Chimney Pond, but it was too like foggy, and the weather forecast didn't support summiting Katahdin that day. So we ended up going back. And at the time, I had a borrowed old 3.5-inch floppy disk digital camera. It was an old Polaroid, one of the first digital cameras I ever used. I no longer have those photos because they were lost to the ether.
Yeah, but I remember it was a huge bull moose. Was the first moose I saw, and he was just laying under a tree, trying to stay out of the heat of the midday. And yeah, I just absolutely this time especially loved that they were just there in our surroundings at the campground and just sitting on our back porch of our cabin and observing them, and just that being part of my day was like super duper special to me, for sure.
Yeah, there was nothing else needed, just us, the moose, and the call of the loons.
For sure. Well, that's it, folks. That's all we've got for you guys for this episode. We know that this one was a bit off the beaten path from our usual birding content, but you've seen some of the footage that Dustin captured for yourself. We actually have so much footage. You'll probably see it pop up in spots in the future as well. But how could we not share it with you?
Yeah, and we want to thank you for your patience in us getting this episode out to you. Baxter State Park is incredible, but it's a big trip for us. It takes a lot of planning, a lot of gear, a lot of driving to get there and back. And then there's all this footage we needed to comb through. No electricity meant no laptop for editing while we're up there. So thanks for your patience while we pulled this all together. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mentioned that Baxter State Park was our first big trip that we took as a couple. So yeah, it was a really special episode to get to share with you guys, because Katahdin and Baxter I look at as the start of our relationship, which is now 20 something years old. And now we've brought this special place to you guys here on Hike Hearth Birding's YouTube channel. So on that note, make sure you're subscribed, give us a like to this video, share some comments on your own special adventures this summer. All of that interaction really helps us out with the little YouTube community of nature lovers and birders that we're trying to build here. And now that I've done my pitch, we know what time it is. It's time for Dustin to send us off on our next adventure. So what's your last comment for us today, Dustin?
Until next time, everyone, keep your eyes on the skies and your hearts in the wild.
Bye, everyone.